Yo, yo. Hey guys, welcome. Thanks for tuning in to the last episode of the little mini podcast that we're doing. And I have a very, very special guest today, my friend Brennan, and I will be discussing other use cases in code email. Instead of me introducing you guys to Brennan, would you mind giving a bit of introduction on who you are and the business that you're running?
Absolutely. Hey guys, so my name's Brennan Chong, founder of Be Found, and pretty much like Wesley said, I am, and probably what the podcast is about as well. I run basically a cold email lead gen agency, but a little bit more of a unique spin on it. We don't call ourselves an agency anymore, maybe a little bit more of a firm. Specifically, I run an investor connection service helping startup VCs raise capital.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, how did you first get into the niche?
Yeah. So I think like most people, we all started in cold email without a niche, right? So last year around April, I spun up a cold email lead gen agency after leaving my sales, tech job as well. And at the start, I pretty much served anyone. I did, a bit of software agency, I did recruiting, did a lot of SaaS businesses as well, because that's what my background was. And over time, as I helped many different clients and started to understand how cold email would work and kind of differ for everyone else, some of our clients who were doing really well ended up needing to raise money at some point. So, they come to you and they're just like, hey, you help me find potential clients. Could you help me find potential investors? So I
Mm,
just dabbled, and dipped my toes in here and there, but it was never really a hey, let's go all in
mm,
on it. At some point, we just started doing really well for these specific businesses as well. And at a point earlier this year, me and my co-founder like split up a little bit, and that really gave me the breathing room to just have a think about, hey, if I was to do this again by myself, do I still want to do this? Because everyone always tells you pick a niche, but it's very, very hard to do when
yeah.
you're like, I think I had like at my max like 12 or 13 clients at the same time, all doing
Mm,
very different niches, and you can't really just pick and choose your niche like from then on. So, I had the time, I sat down and I thought fundraising aspect is what I really, really liked, because I actually really liked speaking to startup founders very specifically. I didn't want to speak to some managers or everything, and they always
yep.
had the most passion. So that's kind of how I fell into the niche, based off almost falling into it, and just ended up doing pretty well for some of these companies.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, thank you for the introduction. I'm really glad that you found your niche. Now, there's one thing that I really want to ask. All right. So, I work with a lot of founders too. And one thing that they always tell me is that if you want to fundraise, you have to know like a network of investors, right? So, let's say you're a founder out there right now and you don't know any investor, you don't have any network. How could cold email potentially help them get there?
Wesley, really good question. And I think, as much as like we don't want to say it, I say this to pretty much every prospect and lead that comes throughout my way, is your network is going to be the number one best way of meeting, right? Any potential
Mm,
investor as well. And that's just a fact, right? Warm
yep.
introduction from your network is just always, always, always going to be the best, because cold outreach is exactly like it sounds, cold, right? However, cold email, what it does, and any sort of cold outreach as well, it helps you with the volume game, because when you've
Mm,
tapped out of investors, and this is especially important for the early stage investors where maybe they just started coming out into the startup space and they haven't been to too many networking events. Maybe you
yep.
only know a handful of investors, and those investors probably aren't the best fit for your specific startup and niche, right?
Mm,
Those investors might only invest in like SaaS businesses, but you're a traditional manufacturing thing trying to take it to the next level,
yeah.
right? So cold email gives you that global reach, and of course helps you be extremely targeted in who you want to reach out to as well, and kind of fills up that sales funnel or the investor funnel, right? You need to speak to multiple people, just like every other sales pipeline.
Yeah, so I mean, it sounds like cold email just a volume game wherever you go, right? Whether it's lead generation, whether it's I don't know how you call it, investor generation,
Yep.
it's all about volume games. You ever encounter any like investor who's like you don't know who they are, they have no idea who you are? Like if there's two complete strangers, like how do you turn that into a meeting?
Yep, good question. I think it's the idea of, if there's a specific need, people always find a way to connect with each other,
Mm,
similar to how you link up a prospect and a founder to any other business as well. If they're
mm,
hitting the right pain point and there's something relevant to talk about within the room, they're always willing to connect as well. And it's just about you understanding how to make that introduction, right? And
Mm,
actually, I wanted to get back to your first point about, is a investor network important? It is going to be as well. So I think the longer you are in the space and you meeting those investors as well, I think it always gives you a leg up. Even if, for my end, because I am connected to a lot of investors, here in Australia and the
mhm.
Southeast Asian region, it helps a lot of my clients by just being able to have that connection to them and be giving a warm referral to them as well.
Yeah, okay. I mean, that sounds fair. So it looks like, I mean, at the end of the day, cold email is still cold email, right? Like it has to be relevant. Like if the investor doesn't care about it, like there's no chance of a meeting. It's just how it's like in lead generation too, right?
100%. You have to be extremely targeted. Some investors are very obvious, online that say, I'm only going to invest in this
Mhm.
sort of, thing. It's a bit interesting because as a prospect, they're actually very, very clear. Like, for example, if I'm targeting, like doing recruiting, if I'm helping a recruiting business and they're looking for prospects, those people aren't always extremely obvious about like who they're trying to hire for, apart from if maybe they
Yeah.
put a post up. But
Mhm.
investors are almost very obviously on their website. They might say, you need this revenue, you need to be in this country, and you need to be in this specific stage. So
Yeah.
they actually tell you and give you all those signals upfront as well.
Gotcha, gotcha. So from somebody who's doing lead generation with cold email to start doing investor connection with cold email, when it comes to copywriting, how do you make sure that your copy actually stand out to the investor? Because I'm sure as an investor, you get tons of email coming asking for funding, right? So how do you stand out above the crowd?
It's the same here, right? So I was speaking to an investor yesterday, right? And he made a post on his LinkedIn where he said, hey, I'm starting a new fund and I'm looking for new startups or new people to raise from as well. And in the first 4 days, he received 161 cold emails, right?
Wow.
So
Yeah.
he definitely receives a lot. Of course, he was almost inviting people in, but just from that one post, he received that many cold emails to just give you an idea of the kind of like bombardment they get already. It's of course in their best interest to read those emails. How do you stand out? Is one, investors are in this space. It's almost like a bubble, right? Where
Yep.
they expect the cold email to look a very specific way. Sometimes, you
Mhm.
like introduce your startup and yourself a little bit. You have to very much understand your problem and solution in like one sentence. Just because,
Yep.
just like anyone else, you don't want to open up your email and you're scrolling through like 3 to 4 pages of an email trying to understand what they do. So,
Yep.
simple writing where you can kind of convey your message across and following a specific framework about, problem, solution, here are the key highlights that's relevant to the potential
Mm.
investor, and then your ask, right? And the call to action is very interesting here. It's usually something like, I'm raising $1 million for my seed round. Can we get a chat? So you need to be very upfront about what you are. It is in some ways a transactional relationship over code email. So that's kind of what I
Mm.
would recommend if you're going to be creating something
Gotcha,
and reaching out to
gotcha.
investors.
That's really good insight. In cold email, a lot of the agency out there they recommend doing some sort of like 1 or 2 sentence cold email. Have you ever tried that with investor, and how have you seen like something like that working in the investing network?
I don't have enough data to be quite honest. I've done it once.
Yeah.
It's extremely risky, right? Because
Mm.
for some of my clients, sometimes they're very specific about who they want. Like for
Yeah.
example, APAC client right now in Australia who's very specific. I want angel investors in Australia. There's not many.
Mm.
There's, at
Yeah.
the end of the day, if I told you that I want to speak to software development businesses, you're gonna have like millions, right?
Yeah.
But with angel investors, especially how hard some of them can be defined, I might only come up with like 5,000. 5,000 sounds like
Mm.
a lot, but it's not a lot for me to do a lot of A/B testing. So you have to be
Yep.
very clear on how you want the framework to look like initially. And from what I
Mm.
what I see, I only tested it once. Is when I did like 1 or 2 sentence emails. I think the investor just thinks that you're not putting in any effort. They don't want to hop on a
Mm.
call just from a, hey, we're a SaaS business. You invest in SaaS businesses. Would you like to hop on a call? They would just come back to me. Like most of my replies were like, what is your SaaS business, right? Because
Mm.
it's too broad. So I don't think it's a great one that actually works well for investors,
Mm.
primarily
Yeah.
because they're probably a little bit more busy than some other founders as well.
Yeah, that's some really good insight. So if you're a founder out there and if you're trying to do some cold email to investor to raise fund, stay away from the short sentence like email and things like that. Be specific. What exactly were you looking for? How much you're looking for? details in your companies and things like that, right? What is the framework that you're using right now that you see like most success when it comes to fundraising?
Yep. So the one that actually made one of the biggest changes right now is, so we still
Mm,
do personalized lines within our
mm,
email. So every
yep.
investor email that comes out of Be Found is slightly targeted to that specific investor in some way, depending on what information we can scrape. But
Yep.
one of the best frameworks that we have right now is in the highlights. At the very start of the highlight, we kind of, it's almost like a, if I was to glance over this email, just by looking at the first word, I know what the trail on sentence is about. So I might at the start of the
Mm,
sentence in bold say revenue, and it says, we're hitting $1 million ARR, right? Instead of just saying a
wow.
mil-
Yep.
we are on track to reach $1 million ARR. I take out that we are bit and just put revenue at the start, and so they're able to see that. And I think maybe this might be the most interesting for anyone that actually does code email. The subject lines, as we all test so many different subject lines in code email, the one that actually works the best are actually the longest subject lines
Hmm, that's
in the
interesting.
email. Yeah, like you never know. It's probably going to change at some point as well. But
Yep.
we do very upfront. We kind of put like investor name, niche, stage of the business, and then I might put like a milestone or like revenue target to just capture interest. And it might be a really long one. So like
Yep.
sometimes I have like a 10-word subject line that works the best compared to like first name, investment question mark. Like so
Yeah.
it's a slightly nuanced space in terms of code email.
Gotcha, gotcha. So, like in a nutshell, it's like the same principle as cold email, but when it comes to like, I guess, quote unquote, best practice, it's slightly different than how you would do for like lead generation and things like that. You want to be like as specific, as detailed you possibly could, so the investor can look at it and they know exactly what company they are, like getting themselves into because they are giving you money at the end of the day. All right. So you want to be like
Yeah.
specific.
A hundred
Cool, cool.
percent. But here's the caveat around that. Cold email is truly just about generating interest, and you're
Yeah.
not trying to sell within that cold email as well, right? So sometimes
Mm,
you don't want to be too specific, because if there's anything bad about your business, or if you want to pitch on the call before they make a snap decision over an email as well. There's some things and bits of information that you don't want to include in that email so that they hop on a call so that you have a chance to pitch. And I
yep.
think that's why a lot of startup founders would actually come to us as well, because we actually help them craft that story. They tell us what they do, what their story is, what their passion is, and we actually
Mm,
kind of tailor that to make sure that the investor, we kind of generate a little bit of interest, we pique their curiosity, so that
yeah.
they're actually willing to hop on a meeting. And of course, we hope that the founder is more than ready and capable enough to actually convince them through face to face, which is of course a better medium than just a regular cold email.
Gotcha, gotcha. I want to ask you a little bit more about personalization. So, when it comes to personalization to cold email, when it comes to outreach to investor, what have you seen like the best personalization, like the most relevant like personalization when it comes to reaching out to investors?
So, we test a lot here at Be Found. The best one right now, and it's really quite marginal. I think a lots of different types of personalization can work,
Mm,
is within the first sentence is we kind of quickly mention how we found them, right? And
mm,
usually the best one right now is talking about a previous investment or portfolio company that they have, and we say like,
mm,
I saw that you previously invested in this company, which is why I'm wanting to reach out, as we're in the same niche and think this might be interesting for you, right? And it's pretty simple to do, if you're using Clay and you're a user of that, or you are able to kind of scrape the right information about what they've previously invested in. It's a very quick, switch of a few words within that sentence as well. That's
mm.
currently our actually best performing personalization.
Cool, cool. So basically mention like a past company they invest in the past and then mention that you might have something similar that they might be interested in. Yeah.
Yep, exactly.
Okay. That's good to know. Oh, when it comes to finding investor, where do you find this investor email aside from Crunchbase? Like, do you recommend any other database that they can find?
Absolutely. There's so many. Like that, one of the hardest things about getting into this space actually was just seeing how inaccessible some of these lists are, because investors,
Mm,
I guess in that sense, they're not always on Apollo, and Apollo isn't great for
yep.
finding investors. So the best one that we use is PitchBook, but it's not accessible for everyone because it is uh,
Expensive, right?
yeah, it's a very expensive annual subscription. But what I'd recommend is, if you want to use the enterprise databases, Traction, PitchBook, Prekin, maybe Deal Room as well. Those four are
Mm.
going to give you a very good base. Crunchbase is really good, and we do use that as well. But it's a little bit more broad, and that information isn't as up to date in our experience. But there's a lot of free lists as well. Folk creates a lot of free lists as well. A lot of people post Airtable databases. So to be quite frank, with every client that we use, I probably use about five different sources for every client. Right. So even
Yeah.
though I do have access to PitchBook, we still just kind of test out lots of different ones, even Signal as well. So and sometimes PitchBook doesn't even perform the best as well. So it's very different depending on who you're after. American client usually actually has more options than a Indian client that we have as well.
Yeah, yeah. I mean that makes sense. What you mentioned earlier, right? Like it's all about a number games, and sometimes clients are very specific on what kind of investor they want to work with because at the end of the day, those are your partner, right?
Yeah.
So whichever database, whichever leads, as much as you could possibly could. So those are really good insights. If you're founders out there, you're looking for investor, those are great sources. So if you're founders and you're looking for investor, you know what to look for. We watched that part. I think those are really good insights. So thank you for sharing that, Brennan. I mean, in terms of like raising fund, like have you seen any other channel that you see like other founders are looking into aside from cold email, and how do you think that compares to like running cold email?
Yeah. So in terms of cold outreach, right, there's lots of different channels, and we did a fair bit of surveying on this as well. Is one,
Mm.
if you're thinking about cold calling an investor, that's blacklistable offense according.
Really?
Yeah, do not cold call your potential investors, like, and especially because the space is quite small, you don't want to burn any bridges as well. So do not do that. I've seen it
Mm.
burn a few bridges as well. But I think one that works pretty well is LinkedIn, or
Mm.
even sometimes reaching out on Twitter as well. I know a lot of people have specifically a lot of access on the LinkedIn side. However, it's of course limited to how much outreach you can do. Right, you can only really about doing at max 50 connections a day, whereas cold email doesn't have that sort of limitation. And like I said as well, some of the best outreach is always you going to networking events, but of course
Mm.
that's very time consuming, and very likely it's very hard to just kind of pick and choose who you actually get to speak to. So I'd
Yep.
say cold outreach and LinkedIn are going to be the best if you wanted
Mm.
to fill up some of those numbers and be extremely targeted in a short amount of time. Every startup that I've seen raise very, very quickly are the ones that already have a lot of momentum because of a previous raise or the current
Yep.
investors that they have, or
Mm-hmm.
they took outreach of investors very seriously. Because for anyone that has done fundraising before, they know how time consuming it is.
Yep.
It's typically a
The volume
six
game.
month process. Yeah. So you want to contract that as much as possible, especially because you're typically quite busy running a startup as well.
Gotcha, gotcha. Thank you so much for that really great insight. Now, I know we're kind of top of the hour, and I do have one last question that I ask all the guests. So, walk me through your most successful cold email campaigns in your niche. Everything from infrastructure setup to copywriting. You don't have to share the exact copy, but maybe the framework, the reply framework, and things like that.
Yeah. Just to clarify, did you want a specific case study of like what performed the best, or did you want a kind of like A to Z walkthrough of how we would set up for a client?
Yeah, just a very high level from A to Z. How do you set up the infrastructure? How do you phrase the email, the framework, and things like that? I know we talk a lot in this podcast already, but anything else that you like to share?
Yeah, of course. So it's all very similar for most of our clients as well. During the onboarding, we have usually about a 1 hour, an hour and a half call onboarding about really understanding their business. Our onboarding form is quite extensive in the sense of we have about 50 questions that we kind of really deep dive into the business, into their fundraise, and the types of investors they want to reach as well. So we get a very good understanding of that. We then actually walk them through a specific investor ready preparation as well, because on
Mhm.
our end we want to make sure that when we create these meetings, that they are ready to actually be able to speak to investors as well. So we do a little bit of training around that. And
Yep.
one thing that's very important that I think that differs from cold email as well is that we create a lot of the assets up front, because investors are pretty much going to ask you for the typical pitch deck, maybe an
Yep.
executive summary, or some of those similar assets as well. So during that onboarding, while you're waiting for all the email infrastructure to be warming up, we're creating all of that or making sure that the pitch deck is a lot tighter as well. right?
Mm.
We essentially create like a data room for investors to look at down the line.
Yep.
Once that's done, of course, the typical cold email infrastructure build, we use about three different platforms to create our email senders, just, for that peace of mind. We don't want to be caught out not being able to send. Once we do that, then it's pretty much typical cold email, right? You launch. Our launch is a very quick A/B test that lasts about 1 week. So let's say if
Mm.
I had a list of 10,000 investors, I usually use about 2,000 of that, so about 20% to do initial testing. And I test up to 6 to 7 angles of variants of their story as well, so that we understand what's the kind of story and spin that is really
Mm.
resonating with your type of investors. And this is the
Yeah.
type of information that our customers really like, right? They might be pitching all the time, but they don't actually have immediate feedback. Cold email
Mm.
gives you that, and we can say, hey, when you mention this about your startup, or the way you talk about this story about the problem, it resonates with this specific investor really well, so that when you hop
Mm.
in, you kind of know how to tailor your pitch as well, right? And then after that, we're scaling, right? We're then using all the multiple databases, ramping up volume, and just slowly booking in meetings. We have a team, of course, of inbox managers. We're applying extremely quick as well. That's one of the best bits of organizing meetings, right? You have to apply extremely quickly to try to book in that meeting ASAP, because these people are busy, and we're trying to make sure that it's as easy for them as possible.
Cool. Well, I think that's a lot of insight. So thank you so much, Brennan, for sharing. And if you're a founders out there looking to raise fund for your next series, book a call with Brennan. I'll link it somewhere here and be found. Use the code Wesley is awesome for 10% off. I'm kidding about the last bit. But yeah, I appreciate you for hopping chat with me today and sharing all the insight. And I'll let you go now. So have a great rest of your day.
Awesome. Really appreciate the time, Wesley. Thank you so much.
Yep, of course. Bye bye.